Let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right, finally finishing off all of the woes, and that'll be with chapter 34, 35, and then we'll start into something new. We'll have to do 36, 37, 38, and 39, and that'll finish out like the first half of Isaiah, and we'll just keep on trucking through. I guess I need to check, make sure that everybody can hear me okay.
Anybody? I hear you fine.
Okay, all right, good enough. Because I was messing with stuff earlier, and when I mess with stuff, it gets messed up. So anyway, I'm Steve Sheik, the congregation leader, rabbi at Tree of Life Messianic Congregation in Houston. We meet in Katy, Texas, and so I want to again welcome all of you in here tonight, and we're right coming up on this area right here, all of the woes, all the judgment on the earth, and we'll finish that part off tonight, and then we will get into these 4 chapters, which would be a historical interlude, and I'll try to bring as much actual history and storytelling into that as we can in the next couple of 3 weeks. So we're still right about this area here, but in this lesson here, Isaiah is really talking way up into the future in many cases. So we're still here at the 701. Sennacherib has either tried and been defeated, or is still surrounding Jerusalem while Isaiah is writing this part of his prophecy. So again, I haven't moved this timeline. All right, chapters 34 and 35. They're quite a contrast. They're contrasting images. One of a productive land that has been turned into a desert, and that would correspond like with the tribulation period. And then the chapter 35 then is the desert that's turned into a garden, and that would correspond to the millennial period. So Isaiah is talking both places. He's talking mostly about the 34 could be the near and the far, but then 35 would be really the far away view of the millennial, because we know that after the exile and all the exiles come back, Israel was still a mess, and it took them a long time to get it productive again, and it really never was super productive until nowadays. I mean, it's very productive now, but with modern technology, but not so much back in those days. So Isaiah had a couple of different things in view here. All right, so let's go ahead with the verses. Verse 1, 34:1. Draw near, O nations, to hear and listen, O peoples. Let the earth hear and all it contains, the world and all its offspring, for Adonai is enraged at all the nations and furious at all their armies. He will utterly destroy them. He will give them over to slaughter. So their slain will be thrown out, and the stench of their corpses will rise, and the hills will be drenched with their blood. Okay, so Isaiah has called, basically, this is a call to the entire world to listen up. And so it has a universal significance to it and a universal scope. And a lot of it just reaches out to everyone. And so the reason that everyone should listen to the Lord is because he's very angry. And he's angry with the nations. And he has determined that he is going to judge all the nations, and they're put them under a ban, as it were. That's a kind of a Hebrew connotation, a Hebrew word. And so here in the Hebrew setting, there's a couple of implications here. One of the ban is significant because spoils are devoted to God to show that God alone has won the battle, like in Jericho. And then when a nation deliberately blocked the flow of God's love to the world, then that nation forfeits itself into God's hands. And so that would be somebody like Amalek or some of the other nations of that area. So humanity is being called now to listen, because God is going to do something, and it's going to be significant. The judgment is going to be really tough. It's basically the tribulation period, the time that when Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple. That's rough, that's tough, but the tribulation period is going to have more of a worldwide effect, and it'll affect all of the nations and all of the people. Like by the time the end of the tribulation occurs, over half the world's population will have been killed. So and it talks about how that, in very graphic language here, it says that the blood of the slain nations will stink and soak the mountains. Again, this is poetry, and it's certainly hyperbole to a certain degree, but it gives you the idea of just how much carnage there's going to be here. And certainly Armageddon, other places in Revelation talk about how the blood will flow to the level of a horse's bridle, and the corpses will be laying. It'll take them months and months to bury the dead. And there is I don't know if some of you have or have not been around areas where human flesh has died and is rotting in the field, or in a battlefield, or in wherever. It's something that you won't forget. And so it's I know, as an investigator with the Coast Guard and investigating deaths and so forth after accidents and so forth, we used to carry little bottles, little deals of Vicks Vapor Rub, so that when you had to go and examine corpses, you could stick it up your nose, and you wouldn't you'd smell the Vicks Vapor Rub, and as bad as that is, it was better than smelling the corpses. Or when they sent us up to the body farm, which is it's a school where they teach coroners and forensic scientists how to determine the age of a corpse, and how long they've been dead and so forth. That was pretty grim. So anyway, the Bible is talking about here about how that is going to be so terrible, how it's going to really stink up everything, and I can tell you that, yeah, it really will. When there's a lot of dead bodies and they're not being being buried. It's terrible, and that's what will happen during the tribulation period. So, I don't know, any comments or questions anybody want to add on to that one? That's pretty grim, so I apologize for that. But it just, when I read that, I said, yep, that's exactly the way it's going to be. And it's terrible. And it's hard to really explain how awful that is. So going ahead with verse 4, then all the host of heaven will dissolve, and the skies will be rolled up like a scroll. So all their array will wither away like a leaf drooping from a vine, like a fig shriveling from a fig tree. Now, evidently, the whole universe is going to be involved in this judgment. And certainly we're talking about the tribulation period. Yes, the entire world will be engulfed in all of this. And the sins of the nations, and then of course the divine reaction of God against the nation. It's going to affect all of creation. It said the hosts of heaven. Well, that would be so depending on your who is making the commentary, they said, well, that could be the leaders of the nations, yes. And it could also be the leaders of the nations. And if we're talking about a near calamity of Isaiah, where within just the next 100 years, those rulers would have had a pantheon of gods that they prayed to and so forth. And so all of those then would have been affected, where where they would worship the moon, the stars, and the sun and all that. Well, evidently, then God is going to rearrange things, and so that even the finality and the permanence of the fixed objects in the sky are going to be upset, and so that people will not be able to rely on that. I know for hundreds and hundreds of years, mariners have relied on those stars being in the certain place in the sky at certain times of year so that you could navigate by them. Well, that's according to Isaiah here, all of that is going to be kind of rearranged, and it's not going to be as permanent and as reliable as it had been in the past. So God is going to just change all of this around in this destruction of the earth and people, and just his judgment is going to change a lot of things around, and things that people had come to rely on will not be there. So verse 5, for my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens. See, it will come down upon Edom, upon the people I have devoted it to judgment. Now, here Isaiah is talking about Edom as a case in point. So what's God got against Edom? Well, if it was just Edom alone, then Isaiah probably would have talked about it like he did the other woes, to Egypt and to Babylon and to Assyria. But I think in this case, most everyone agrees that when he says Edom, that is just a metaphor for, and also an example of the nations that were against Israel all the time. Just their perennial enemy was Edom. And so when he's talking about Edom here, it's actually encompassing all of the nations, because eventually all the nations will come against Israel. And therefore then when God's patience finally runs out, then his wrath, his punishment, his judgment will not be just on one little country, but it's going to be poured out on every all humanity and all of the nations all over the world. All right, so and as a result, in here, humanity as a whole rejected God, and therefore then it's going to come under judgment. Okay. Any comments or questions on that so far? If I know some of these concepts are a little bit.
Wasn't Edom a bad how do I say that? A bad place anyway? A bad country or part of Israel?
It was Edom was it was kind of like a perennial.
Esau.
Yeah, it's Esau, and it was a perennial enemy of Israel, and just kind of like that thorn in the side.
Yeah.
Kind of.
So that's how it can represent.
Yeah.
Everybody who's against him. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, yeah, that's what Edom would represent. Of course, the Moab was another one right down there. It's on the eastern. Edom is basically kind of like Jordan, what we would consider Jordan today, that area. That's what Edom was. Okay. So Edom was in the Old Testament times really the antithesis of Israel, their perennial enemy as such. So going ahead into verse 6 is the sword of Adonai is filled with blood, gorged with fat, the blood of lambs and goats, the fat of the kidneys of rams. For Adonai has a sacrifice in Basra, a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Wild oxen will go down with them, bull calves with mighty steers. So their land will be soaked with blood and their dust greasy with fat. Okay, so what we have here is an imagery of basically of sacrifice. Okay, this is sacrificial language here when they're talking about the fat that's on the fat of the kidneys of the rams, because God talks specifically about when they do the sacrifices that the fat that's around the kidneys and around in the other parts of an animal, those are to be put on the altar. The Awasi sheep that they were the sheep of choice. They were the kind of sheep that they had back in the early days of Israel, and actually up through Yeshua's time also. They are quite known for they've got a great big fat deposit back on their rear end around the tail. That whole area, that hindquarters there has a large fat deposit that helps the sheep survive lean times in the desert. But that area where they slaughtered the Awasi sheep for sacrificial purposes, that fat was also put on the altar and burned up. So those fat deposits throughout the body of the sacrificial animals was not allowed to go to the people. God said, no, the fat is mine. I will take the fat. And some people say, well, the fat is where the flavor is, and in some cases it's probably true, but God said, that's what I want. That's my part. And so therefore that's what the sacrifice, what went into the sacrifice. So
we shouldn't be eating it. We shouldn't be eating that.
Well, you shouldn't be eating the what they were talking about was the fat around the organs. If you go into if you slaughter an animal, there are certain places where they have fat deposits, and I'm not sure that it would be particularly, like you cut it, you have a steak, you got some fat around that, but that was not what God had in mind on this. He was talking about the areas around the kidneys, around the liver, around various places within the body, and it varied from animal to animal where their fat deposits were, and so those great big globs of fat were to be sacrificed and not eaten. And really and truly it would not have been healthy for people to do that anyway. But back in those days, with the way that they raised cattle and sheep and goats, there would have been very little fat throughout the musculature of an animal, like we have today, where you have, like, for grass-fed beef, they will finish them off on corn the last 6 or 8 weeks before they're slaughtered. And what that does, it infuses then the meat with a lot of fat, and that makes the meat more tender and a little bit tastier. And so yeah, we as my wife and I, as a practice, we buy totally grass-fed beef that is not finished out on corn. So the meat that we have is very lean and doesn't have a lot of fat in it. In fact, the hamburger parts of it, you have to be very careful because there's no fat there. I mean, it's like 95% meat and no fat, and so it cooks differently than when you just have normal hamburger meat from the supermarket. So anyway, that's where we're talking about here, is that those fat deposits. And God says, no, that's part of this language that they're talking about. And then when it goes into in the Old Testament, the result of sin is death. That was if you sinned, you could be stoned. It was death. In the New Testament, they say that what are the wages of sin is death, and same in the Old Testament. And so the sinner either had to die, or there would have been a substitute for that, but something had to die. And that was the whole thing about the Day of Atonement and the sacrificial system that God had prepared for the Israelites, is a way of substituting, and the animal would die rather than the person for their sins. And so sacrifices were necessary, and sadly, those that will, what's a good word, repudiate the sacrifice of Yeshua the Messiah for their sins, not having anything to do with him, then basically they're forfeiting their own lives then as a sacrifice, because Yeshua has already paid that price and has sacrificed himself for us. So in verse 7, they talk about the wild oxen will go down with them, bull calves with the mighty steers. So that is a reference to the leaders of the nations will go down just like the common man. Normally in a war, in battles, the leaders, the generals, and so forth, they stand up there on their horses on the hilltop and watch the armies go at it against each other, or they'll sit in modern warfare today. They'll sit in headquarters sometimes in the United States, watching on a monitor from a drone or something like that. And so they never even get near a battlefield. But back in those days, generals and kings and leaders were expected to lead and to actually go into battle. And in this case, then the leaders are going to go down just like the common man is going to go down. and no one is spared from the possibility of death there. So I did want to show you where Basra is. This is about 20 miles from here to Eilat. Eilat is the Israeli town right on the end of the Dead Sea, and there's still a city there, and it's let's see if I can find where I wrote down it's the modern day Busera, and there is a city, and that was the capital of Basra, was the capital of Edom at the time, and prosperous city, but it's not so prosperous today, and that whole area around there is still pretty remote and bleak as the way when we were over there looking at that sort of stuff. It's just hard to make a living there, that's for sure. Verse 8, for Adonai has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the hostility against Zion. All right, so the Lord is going to take a vengeance on those who have trodden down Israel. It's not going to be just for their own sins, and certainly the nations in Canaan were under judgment by God when Israel first came in after the Exodus. They came into Canaan to take over. Well, those nations were under judgment. They were under ban, and that's when God said, "Okay, drive them out of the nation, out of the territory. You can drive them wherever. They can go up to, they can go up into north of the Euphrates. They can go to the east past the Jordan. They can go south to Egypt or wherever, Ethiopia, whatever place. But if they don't leave the nation, the territory that I'm giving you, then they're to be killed, wiped out, no trace of them left." And Israel didn't do that, and of course they're still suffering from that today. But so those were under ban because of their own immorality and sins. Now God is saying, okay, not only the sinful nations are going to be under ban, but they're going to be, just for their sins, they're also going to be condemned because they have attacked God's chosen people. And that was the next reason for that. Now, when it talks about a day of vengeance and a year of recompense, that points to the fact that, okay, this is not somewhere in the in the distant future that, it may happen, it may not happen, we don't know. It's just, and we fight that again, all the time now, where all of my life, all of your lives, for 2,000 years, people say that the Messiah is coming back, and this could be the year, this could be it, and in times past, I don't think they had a real good grasp of what is required for the Messiah to come back. And part of it is that Israel is going to have to come to the point where they're begging for the Messiah to come back, not just waiting for him to come back. And they said, Yeshua himself says, "I will not come back until all of Israel says, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai," which is blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're going to have to recognize Yeshua as the Son of God and as the Messiah. And so other things that have to happen, there has to be a temple standing in Jerusalem where that is the center of the Jewish worship. Those sacrifices will be made, and so that all has to be in place before the end of the tribulation, and then Yeshua comes back. But there will be a time, and it's going to be a specific time, and it's not just somewhere over the rainbow kind of a thing. So, but justice will be served. Just as sure as the sun comes up tomorrow, God is going to come back and take care of business. So, verses 9. Its streams will be turned into pitch, its dust into brimstone, and the land will become burning tar. It will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation, it will lay waste forever and ever. None will pass through it. Okay, we've got a comment. There you go, justice. We will see justice. The Isaiah described Edom's overthrow, and these the terms here that he's using, the pitch and the brimstone and the tar and so forth. Well, we've seen that one before back in Sodom and Gomorrah, and actually Sodom and Gomorrah were in that area. We don't really know quite for sure whether it was on the western side of that Dead Sea or just on the eastern side of it, but it was right down there at the bottom. And they really don't know where they were, but this description is it's very familiar, and it looks like what Sodom and Gomorrah might have been. Now, is it a literal thing here? I think that a lot of it could be that what Isaiah is seeing here is figurative. These punishments, these judgments are such that in many cases they are poetic hyperbole. They're a little bit, way out there and just over the top in their destruction and so forth. But at the same time, if you look at this in terms of, okay, what would happen if there was nuclear war in that area, where that just things melt away, and then some things are going to burn, and they'll burn and burn. There's nothing that can put them out. Nuclear warfare, it could be, or maybe something even worse will be developed later on. But if you've ever been to Hiroshima or Nagasaki and seen the pictures of those areas, and what just a very, very, by today's standards, what a small nuclear bomb could do. Well, it's 100 times worse today, and it could just be so devastating that words just cannot adequately describe it. So Isaiah is describing things as best he can here, and we know, right now, we know that there are times where things that once they get started on fire, once you get a Tesla and a Tesla gets on fire, well, you might as well just let it burn itself out, because you're not going to be able to get enough water on it really to put it out, unless you just submerge it. Magnesium is another element that very, very difficult to put out once it starts burning. And so it talks about the fire will not be quenched day or night. The smoke will go up forever. And so a lot of these things that Isaiah is talking about here could very well be, we could put those into modern context and see that, it could very well be, we can see that sort of thing today. Carmen.
So, but if you look at the past, what God has done when he gets mad and has had it up to here, with peoples. I think, I mean, the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, what he did to Israel, I mean, it's bad.
Sure.
It can be, it will be that bad, I think.
Well, I think there will be a lot of a lot of bad things. Yeah, a lot of devastation. I think that looking at the war, there will be a war against Israel during this tribulation period. And it will get to the point where Israel will have their back to the wall, and it's almost as if they would not be able to, they wouldn't, in the natural, would not be able to stand. And so as a result, they're going to, I think Israel is going to be crying out to God for salvation from the salvation in the terms of rescue from the enemy, and then that's when God comes in and miraculously defeats the enemies of Israel, and that's when they say that they will see that it was God that was doing that. So I think when Paul says that eventually that all Israel will be saved, that may be what he's talking about there, is that this end of the world or the end times battle against Israel, and then the Lord comes in, Yeshua comes in and slaughters the enemy just with the words of his mouth, and Israel will say and see all of that, and at that point they would that's when they would say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and they'll look on him who they pierced, and will see what it was that they rejected for these 2,000 years. And so that's going to be a very eye-opening thing for the Jewish people when that happens. So, but yeah, it's going to be devastation all over the world, and so things are going to be bad. But guess what? Those of us that still believe that the believers will be going through the tribulation, but God is very well able to shield us, shelter us, just like he sheltered Israel with the plagues of Egypt. They did not suffer the same plagues that Egypt did, with the bloody Nile. The Israelites still had water. The frogs of the darkness. It was dark in Egypt, but not in Goshen where the Israelites were. And the death angel came over and killed all of the firstborn, but not in the houses of Israel, if they took the precaution and obeyed God and put the blood on the doorposts. And
okay, we'll end with that right there. That's a good note. The other is scary.
Well, yeah, but people need to be aware that
that is true. Yeah,
it is going to hit the fan, and so anyway, let's go on through this. We need to close this out here. Verse 11 through 13. But pelican and porcupine will have it; owl and raven will dwell in it. He will stretch a line of chaos over it and stones of desolation. For as for its nobles, there are none that are there to call it a kingdom. All its princes will come to nothing. Thorns will come up in its palaces, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. It will be a haunt of jackals, an abode for ostriches. All right. Now, the animals that are listed here. It's very difficult to come up and be able to pinpoint, okay, is that exactly what they're talking about? An ostrich, running around in the Middle East? Well, there's, I don't know that the Middle East is the natural habitat of an ostrich. But And pelicans. What does a pelican have to do with the desert area of Edom, other than the fact that pelicans, they're when they build a nest on the land, it's not right around a bunch of other birds. It's more remote, and they're kind of beside, all by themselves. And so yeah, it could, we just don't know what Ed says, maybe a camel that they're talking about there, but we don't really know. The camels were more domesticated, so I think what they have in mind here are maybe wild animals as such, but we just don't know. And so what we can draw from these verses here, that human leadership will have been basically wiped away, and that only the wild animals will inhabit this area around Israel. And remember, now these end time prophecies, they are Israel centric, meaning that all of these prophecies are centered around what goes on in Israel. Oftentimes when I teach Daniel or Revelation or some of the other prophetic books, people will say, well, what does it say about the United States in prophecy? And I will say zip, zero, nada. It just, the United States is not mentioned in there. The whole North and South America are not mentioned. Australia is not mentioned. Antarctica and the Arctic, all these areas, they're not mentioned, other than this says that all the nations will come against Israel. And so I would have to assume that the United States will have some form of government that will be anti-Semitic and will come against Israel in some way, shape, or form. And I would not want to be in the U.S. military when that happens, and having to, be there and go against Israel, because I know how it's going to come out, how it's going to end. I cheated and I read the end of the book. And so I know that it will not end well for all of the armies that come against Israel. In fact, the Bible says in this chapter, in chapter 34, that all of them will be wiped out. And so that land, the devastation is going to be such that basically everything's going to be in ruins, and the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, are going to be populating those places. Alan says when he read this, his first thought was a description of Chernobyl today. Well, yes, that's one. Definitely one. I mean, because that area there, it's uninhabitable. They've tried to go back in there, and the people that do end up getting sick, or if they even have children, if they're able to bear children, then the children are either sickly or stillborn or malformed or something like that. The nuclear plant that was messed up over there in Japan is another example of the devastation from nuclear that we can see, and we've yet to see what might happen if there was an actual wide-scale chemical event, say that COVID on steroids, or the nerve gases and so forth that that have been used on people from time to time. But what happens if it's so widespread that it contaminates the land, the water, everything around it, and continues to kill and maim and destroy people for a long time? We don't know, but that's what we have in mind here. What these verses would have in mind. So going on, wildcats will meet with wolves. The goat demon will cry to its kind. Yes, the night monster will settle there and find itself a resting place. A tree snake will nest and lay eggs there, hatch and gather them under its shadow. Surely hawks are gathered there, each one with her mate. All right, the language here, again, they're using terms for animals that that we have to just look at it and say, scratch your head and say, huh? Because, okay, wildcats and wolves. We understand what wildcats and wolves are. Goat demons, that was a kind of a mythical character, say, like, the half man, half goat, what do they call it, that, a satire. And the night monster, if you some translations talks about being the night bird, and all of these point back to ancient myths that were just scary things for people, and these myths and monsters preyed especially on children, and kind of like today, you look under the bed, make sure that there's no monsters under the bed. Or for some of us, you look under the bed and say, wow, if man is dust to dust, earth, if we go from dust to dust, you look under the bed and say, wow, somebody's either coming or going under that bed. So, it's myth. We understand those kind of things. A tree snake, we don't know what a tree snake is. Some translations call it an owl of some sort, because of the translation of the word and one letter difference and so forth. So we don't know what it is, but we can again go back to the idea that this is going to be for wild animals and not for human beings. So it'll be so devoid. Some of these areas will be so devoid of human population that the animals that we tried to control in the past, they'll be able to multiply at will, and some of these things will be able to, that maybe even in cases of, we think of them as mythical creatures, like I guess you could say, Bigfoot would be something that, okay, maybe Bigfoot's gonna be, you'll see them. Or down here in South Texas and northern Mexico, we have a thing called a chupacabra, yeah, something like that. And it's sort of a mythical creature in a way that kills young cattle and so forth. And or if you find especially if you find a dog that's sickly and got mange, has lost all of its hair and looks real hideous, that somebody will say, see, it's a chupacabra, whatever that word is. And but the imagery here is that, yeah, these wild animals are just going to take hold and be able to take control. All right, final verses of this chapter, and I got to really hurry here. It says, seek from the scroll of Adonai and read. Not one of them will be missing. None will lack its mate. For his mouth commanded it, and his ruach gathered them. He cast the lot for them, and his hand divided it out to them with the line. They will possess it. They will possess it forever. They will possess it forever. I think it's a misprint in the software. They will possess it forever and dwell in it from generation to generation. So here Isaiah is closing out the chapter, and he's going back to what he wrote in verse 1, that is summoning the entire world to come and listen up, folks. This is what's happening. And he's assuring them that this is what's going to happen. He says, look in here. I'm writing all this down, and I want you to compare the prophecy then with the fulfillment of it. And everything that I'm telling you came from God, and it's going to happen. Nothing that I'm saying here will not happen. And that's what the none will lack its mate. The prophecy and the fulfillment you'll see both of those. And why? Because God commanded it. God said it, and his ruach, his spirit, has gathered all of that together. So, Carmen.
Yes. Okay. I'm trying to understand this. I know I've asked this question in different ways before. Who? Okay. Is Isaiah saying this to, like, the president? Is he saying it to a few people, to the rabbis? Is he saying it to all the people? They didn't have a microphone then. How did all the people hear this and not pay attention?
Well, no, okay, this would have been something that went out to the leaders of Judah. Okay, now that's where he's talking about here, the leaders of Judah.
Okay.
And yet
Okay.
at the same time, when they broadcast or put these things out, it wasn't in the form of, okay, here's a secret message to the king of Judah. He would
Right.
in the palace and proclaim all of this. Well, once he did that, then how many people you got in the palace, and it would spread like wildfire.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And
Okay. I got that.
so, yeah, I mean, it's not like today where something could happen and we could, we knew somebody came up and talked to me on Shabbat morning, said, did you hear that the Wagner group is coming against Putin? And, and it's all real time. We can follow these things real time now. Back in those days, no, it took a little while, but it would spread like wildfire. And the other side of it is that it's kind of like the game that you play as children, that when you tell a secret or tell
Right.
something, and you tell the other people, whisper it to the next person, by the time you get around to the 10th person, it has no bearing in fact. It's so changed around. And so that sort of thing would go on, and the word would get out. But Isaiah is saying here, okay, you mark my words. You can see what I'm writing here, what God has told me to put in the book, and it's all going to come true. So, and then we jump into Isaiah 35, and I want to finish this off tonight because I don't want to have to go back to it. But here's the flip side of it. Okay. The wilderness and dry land will be glad. The desert will rejoice and blossom like a lily. It will blossom profusely, will rejoice with joy and singing, will be given the glory of Lebanon, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of Adonai, the splendor of our God. So there's a big difference now, stark contrast between chapters 34 of the devastation and the rotting corpses and the wild animals and all that kind of stuff, to now 35. Well, the desert is going to bloom, and there's going to be flowers, and it's going to be singing and dancing and celebration and good harvest. And so the contrast could not be more stark. And when they're talking about here, remember when we talked about Edom representing all of the nations and all of the world? Well, we can maybe assume here, and I know it's bad to try to assume things, but as like he was talking about, all of the destruction was for all the earth, then now the restoration of the earth would be in play here, and that we would see again. This would be during what, the millennial period, that 1,000-year reign of Yeshua in Jerusalem, that where part of the curse of sin on mankind would be reversed, and then we would experience a bloom in the desert, and I could grow squash that didn't have vine borers in them, and that would kill all of my squash plants overnight, like has happened this year. Last year it didn't do it. This year it did. But that restoration is going to come, and it's probably for all the earth. Okay. The wilderness and the desert area that was so lifeless and devastated, just wiped out of all mankind, it's now going to bloom, and the rains will come in the right time. And if you've ever been in the desert and seen how after the rain, in just a couple of days, I mean, flowers will pop out of everywhere, and it'll be nice and green and lush. And so at this point, though, that nice green and lush is going to last for 1,000 years. And so the idea of Lebanon, Carmel, and Sharon are areas that were all renowned for their beauty and just the wonderful landscape. And it is even today. So parts of Lebanon and Carmel, you go up on Mount Carmel and the northern part of Israel, and you look out over the Jezreel Valley and all of the agriculture and the greenery, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful sight. And so they're metaphors for beauty and abundance. And so, of course, the reason now that Isaiah he brings this, what's the reason for it? Because God is showing his glory and his power. He can destroy, but he can also restore, and now he's restoring. 3 and 4, strengthen the limp hands, make firm the wobbly knees. Say to those with anxious heart, be strong, have no fear. Behold your God. Vengeance is coming. God's recompense, it is coming. Then he will save you. All right. So here Isaiah said the limp the limp hands and the wobbly knees. Okay, that is kind of a picture of people that they don't have any recourse or anything. That it's kind of, I guess you'd kind of like you'd say it's kind of like when if the IRS gets after you, what do? You surrender, because there's really not a whole lot. You certainly can't fight the IRS. You can't fight the government because they got deep pockets and you don't. And so you just kind of throw up your hands and nothing you can do, or the wobbly knee thing like that with people who live under tyranny, and the jackbooted thugs of Nazi Germany, and you see Mao and his Red Brigade, and Stalin, where, I mean, these people killed millions and millions of their own people. So yeah, people were very afraid. But now God has said, okay, don't worry about that, because I'm going to come in. We're going to have some devastation. We're going to have some recompense, but I will restore, and those that trust in God will be saved. And there will be, at the end of the tribulation, some believers, and then quite a few unbelievers. And so there will be, it'll be a different world, but God is in control, and he's going to make it all right. Then verse 5, and then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame and will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will sing. All right, so here is a case where in old times, when they talk about deaf and blind, it was a reference to a physical condition, but it could also relate to a spiritual condition, that people couldn't hear the voice of God. They were deaf, they were blind, they couldn't see what God was telling them to do or what they were supposed to do. And so in the future, both of the physical blindness and deafness will go away, and the spiritual blindness and deafness will also go away. Why? Because people will recognize who God is, what he's done for them, and what he can do for them, and they will trust in him. And so the result then, of course, is a renewed spirit within mankind, and the millennial period will be a great period of time. So the last part of verse 6 and then 7, water will burst forth in the desert and streams in the wilderness. The parched land will become a pool, the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals where they rest, grass will become reeds and rushes. All right, so these, we've talked about the former limitations of believers will end, and they're going to rejoice, but then they're talking about the water in the dry land. It's for Israel. If you've ever been in dry desert areas of the Middle East, all throughout the Middle East and Israel, it's dry and barren and desert. And so water is a very, very potent symbol of life and salvation, because, having been born in West Texas on a farm, water was so essential to us in trying to raise crops. If you had good rains, you could have possibly a good crop if the boll weevils didn't get the cotton. But if you had no rain, then you went broke trying to irrigate, and still may not have a good crop. Water was just very important. So the dry land that was there is now going to become an oasis, and not just a mirage that's just further and further out there as you go. And so the area that had been the haunt, for the wild animals, well, they still be a haunt for the wild animals, but it's going to be so lush and green and everything that the wild animals, maybe they're going to be changed too. And so it's not going to be a dangerous place for people. A highway will be there, a roadway. It will be called the way of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it. It is for one who walks the way. Fools will not go astray. All right. So this highway, we don't know. Is he talking about a highway from Babylon back to Israel, or is it talking about a highway for the people of the world to come to Jerusalem to worship the King there? Maybe one or the other, maybe both, possibly both. I would think that the imagery is there, and so it's going to be called the way of holiness, but not because of the road itself is holier, but it's because of the people that are traveling that road. And so the unrighteous people won't be using that road. This is going to be reserved for the righteous. And so that's would lead me to believe that there's more concerned with going up to Jerusalem and worshiping the Lord there. And so last two verses, no lion will be there, no ravenous beast will go upon it. They will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there. The ransom of Adonai will return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy upon their heads. They will obtain gladness and joy and sorrow and sighing will flee away. I believe there's a song that somebody has written for that, but I'm not going to sing it for you tonight, okay? And you can thank me for that later. But even though the land was home for the wild animals, God's changing their nature. Remember where it talks about the lion and the wolf will the lion and the calf, or the wolf, the lamb will lie down together. Children will be able to play with a cobra. It will be a completely different part of creation where God is going to change the nature of the animals. The redeemed ones, the people who have believed in God, they're the ones that will be using these highways, and there will be a disparity in the millennial period. There will be a time where there will be people who are redeemed, and then those that are not. Now, the Bible, it's going to be a good, happy time, and I think we'll just have to end it there because we've pretty much run out of time. But